everyone! This video is something that I urgently needed to talk about, and I have put geology and paleontology videos on hold to work on because, as an academic, as a skepticism and science channel, I need to defend a fellow academic who is being defamed in the media for the way she marked an essay, and defamed to the extreme, to the extent that politicians are now getting involved. This lecturer has been placed on administrative leave by her university for this marking. So why do I care? I care because what has happened could arbitrarily happen to anyone and is not even subtly being conducted as an act of bigotry against her, which sets a horrifying precedent for the ease by which right-wing institutions can arbitrarily destroy the career of academics, and in particular transgender academics. A category which I also fit into, as do countless other incredible scientists whose identities are now being weaponized against them. So let's have a look at what happened, why it happened, how it happened, the inexcusable way that the University of Oklahoma has responded to this situation, and why Mel Kerf must be defended. A couple of nights ago, far-right campaign group Turning Point USA posted an article to Twitter claiming that University of Oklahoma student Samantha K. Fulnecki was failed in an assignment by her transgender professor. Gee, I wonder why they put transgender as the first word of their headline. Because she, according to them, quoted the Bible in the essay. It was later reported that Samantha had submitted a complaint against Mel Kerf, the professor, but we'll get to that, in question, for religious discrimination on the basis of this grade. Turning Point also posted Samantha's essay and a section, though not all, of the rubric for marking. The rubric for the marking of this essay was later posted online by a number of sources, and both of the markers' comments were also posted by Turning Point. This evidence that they posted is how I can demonstrate conclusively that they are lying about the situation, as is every other right-wing news outlet which has uncritically parroted their claim that Samantha was failed by Mel for quoting the Bible. First, some context. Samantha K. Fulnecki is a psychology student who, in one of the modules of her undergraduate degree, took a paper in which she was asked to respond to an article. This article, which I have linked in the description. Now this is the marking rubric, and the key points are that she had to write a 650-word paper demonstrating that she had read the article and including a thoughtful reaction to the material presented within it. There were 25 points that the students could get from this article. These points coming from the fact that the paper that the student presents needs to clearly tie into the article. Is there a clear link back to the assigned article? And can the reader assess whether or not the student has actually read the article? Does the paper provide a reaction, reflection, or discussion of some aspect of the article, rather than just a summary? That's the next 10 points, and the final 5 points are for clarity of writing. Are the main ideas organized into a coherent discussion? Is the writing clear enough to follow without multiple rereadings? Now, I have worked as a tutor at a university, and I have marked probably about 200 or 300 student papers during my time working as a tutor. So I kept this rubric in mind, as well as general scientific writing practice and principles. So let's see how I, if I were in Mel's position, would have graded this report objectively, and see if I agree with Mel Kerf that this paper was worth 0 points out of 25. First, I'm just going to go through it in terms of a scientific writing standpoint, and then we're going to go back to the rubric. This article was very thought-provoking. You've forgot a hyphen there, and caused me to thoroughly evaluate the idea of gender and the role it plays in our society. The article discussed peers using teasing as a way to enforce gender norms. I do not necessarily see this as a problem. Okay, I'm gonna just interject here. You don't see bullying as a problem? Anyway, God made male and female and made us differently from each other on purpose and for a purpose. Okay, you cannot make an objective statement in scientific writing without citing it, without citing evidence for that claim, which means you need definitive evidence that God exists in a peer-reviewed scientific paper, which would be fucking huge. So anyway, massive citation missing. Let's move on. God is very intentional with what he makes. Citation missing. And I believe trying to change that would only do more harm. Gender roles and tendencies should not be considered stereotypes. Why not? I think you need to explain that because, like, these are things that originate in our culture in terms of why people do specific things, which is kind of how stereotypes form culturally. Women naturally want to do womanly things because God created us with those womanly desires in our hearts. Okay, first, cite with evidence to back up your claim. Second, what do you mean by womanly things and womanly desires? These are entirely subjective definitions, and something which is seen as womanly might be completely different from one person to another. The same goes for men. Again, citation missing. God created men in the image of his courage and strength, and he created women in the image of his beauty. Citation needed. In fact, I don't even think that's something said in the Bible. But again, it would help if she was even quoting parts of the Bible. Thus far, she hasn't even cited her scriptural evidence. He intentionally created women differently from men, and we should live our lives with that in mind. Why? Justify why we should do that. You can't just put an ideological point in an essay without justifying why. It is frustrating to me when I read articles like this and discussion posts from my classmates that so many have been trying to conform to the same mundane opinion so that they do not step on other people's toes. I think that this is a cowardly and insincere way to live. It is important to use the freedom of speech we have been given in this country. How is that relevant? I'm sorry, you've started talking about your fellow classmates, and I don't see how this in any way connects to the article. It's just your opinion of the opinions of your classmates. And I personally believe that eliminating gender in our society would be detrimental as it pulls us farther from God's original plan for humans. I think, again, you should justify this with evidence and explain why you think this. It is perfectly normal for kids to follow gender stereotypes because that is how God made us. So, God made male and female socialization? How? Like, I'm sorry, how did God make the way our societies work when our societies are pretty darn fallen if we go by the Bible? The reason why so many girls want to feel womanly and care for others in a motherly way is not because they feel pressured to fit into social norms. Provide evidence. This needs citations. In particular, this needs broader surveys of lots of women. Maybe that's true for you, but unless you survey a large number of women, you cannot make this objective, factual statement without evidence. It is because God created and chose them to reflect his beauty and his compassion in that way. Okay, again, you've already said this is repetition, presumably to pad out the length of the essay to fit the count, but also, again, citation needed. Also, if you're going to say this, Please say why many women don't feel this way, including many Christian women. In Genesis, God says it is not good for man to be alone. So he created a helper for man, which is woman. Many people assume the word helper in this context to be condescending and offensive to women. However, the original word in Hebrew is kenegdo, and that directly translates to helper equal to. Now, this is a good point which is often missed, but it has nothing to do with the article that you're talking about. You're not discussing the article. Additionally, God describes himself in the Bible using kenegdo, or helper. Okay, again, relevance. And he describes his Holy Spirit as our helper as well. Again, I know that this is true, but you need to cite these things. This shows the importance God places on the role of helper, brackets, women's roles. And also, when I was reading this, I couldn't help but think that, like, this was specifically referencing God's creation of Eve as a helper to Adam. Like, I really think that if she's viewing man and woman solely in the sense of the roles of Adam and Eve, she should really justify why this should apply to all women. God does not view women as less significant than men. Again, another point that you need to justify with evidence. You're making so many objective statements about the opinion of God, but like, where are these opinions coming from? I get that these opinions could be coming from the Bible, and presumably are, but they're not cited, and they make the default assumption that God exists, which again is not a default assumption that can be made when discussing science. Unless God does suddenly reveal himself to the world, in which case, hey, you can talk about this objectively as God existing. But as that has not happened, you can't say these things about God in a science context. He created us with such intentionality and care, and he made women in his image of being a helper and in the image of his beauty. This is what, like the third time you've said this? Why are you repeating yourself so much? If leaning into that role means that I am following gender stereotypes, then I am happy to be following a stereotype that aligns with the gifts and abilities that God gave me as a woman. Okay, so please explain biblically why you feel that socially constructed gender stereotypes are biologically innate, and also, what on earth does this have to do with the topics of the article, which was about teasing of gender non-conforming kids? I do not think men and women are pressured to be more masculine or feminine. Okay, well, do you have any evidence to back up your opinion? I strongly disagree with the idea from the article that encouraging acceptance of diverse gender expressions could improve students' confidence. Why? Like, surely, logically, it would boost the confidence of trans and particularly closeted or questioning students. Like, that feels like common sense, and I feel like if you don't think that's the case, you really need to explain why. Society pushing the lie that there are multiple genders. Okay. What the fuck? First, you need to explain why you think that this is a lie, especially since God is an absolute being who self-identifies as male. And since sex and gender are different. Also, a citation on this claim is demonic? Like, the existence of demons cannot currently scientifically be demonstrated. Like, how can you just say this is demonic in a science class? And severely harms American youth. I do not want kids to be teased or bullied in school. Okay, but like at the opening of the essay, you literally said that it doesn't matter if children get teased. So like, there's a huge contradiction here again. However, pushing the lie that everyone has their own truth and everyone can do whatever they want and be whoever they want is not biblical whatsoever. I'm sorry, why does something being biblical relate to this article and also relate to their quality of life. The Bible says that our lives and our bodies belong to the Lord for His glory. This only applies to Christians though, and there is no reason to enforce this view on others who don't believe that their lives and bodies belong to God. I live my life based on His truth and firmly believe that there would be less gender issues and insecurities to children if they were raised knowing that they do not belong to themselves, but they belong to the Lord. The rest of this essay just ends like a sermon. There is no discussion of the paper really in any of this. Now, let's go back to the rubric. Okay, so you are writing a science essay in which it is expected that any sources you are using in your discussion would be, you know, falsifiable, testable, not asserting things about God who is currently at least unfalsifiable. The Bible is not a textbook, nor is it a scientific paper. Instead of discussing science or discussing the paper, all Samantha did was repeat religious dogma that is not relevant to the discussion. But to make things even more frustrating, she doesn't even cite the parts of the Bible that back up her points. Here's the thing, I actually think citing religious texts could be very useful in discussions of psychology, given how much a lot of people base their personalities and their sense of morality on their faith that they grew up in. But she doesn't even do that. The Bible is never quoted, despite what Turning Point and many other social media influencers have claimed about her and about this essay. Nor is it even cited, and the notion of a scientific discussion simply uncritically saying God says this or bringing up the influence of demons is absurd. These are personal beliefs, but they are not based in empirical evidence or studies or even on philosophy. I am not an atheist, I am an agnostic who was raised Christian and who identified as Christian until very recently. But even when I was in a literal cult, I knew that science and faith were entirely separate things, since science involves testing hypotheses using observations and experimentations and data, and God's existence cannot reliably be tested in that way, so should not be treated as fact in the discussion of science. And in scientific writing, even if we're just giving an opinion, we do not make absolute statements of facts, like the many things that Sam said about God, without citing them so that people can find out where those statements of fact come from. Even citing the Bible would have been preferable to citing nothing. The final page of this paper, frankly, reads like the end of a sermon and has no bearing on the article she was being asked to respond to at all. So now let's grade the article. First, let's look at the first 2 points. A clear tie to the article, and does it provide a reaction or reflection or discussion of the article? Well, the essay was supposed to discuss her thoughts on the article, but Samantha does not quote or respond to any segment of this text or discuss any part of it. The only ties to the article that I can see in this entire essay are the brief intro bit where she calls it thought-provoking, though she fails to go into any detail about anything in the article, and the brief mention of teasing, which she could have got by simply skimming the abstract. She doesn't discuss anything in the actual text of this paper that she's supposed to be responding to, nor does she discuss anything in the text of the paper. It's not even really evident that she read the paper in the first place instead of just skimming it. So instantly, the first 20 points out of 20 are objectively a no. And there is no way to pretend otherwise. But what about the final 5 points? Were the main ideas and thoughts organized into a coherent discussion? Well, considering that she doesn't actually discuss anything in this paper, and that most of it is just genuinely bordering on incoherent, especially given the sheer number of religious statements and repetitions which are repeatedly used as statements of fact, no, this is objectively a 0 out of 25 paper. There is no way that even a religious conservative could read this paper, use this rubric for marking it, and come to the conclusion that this paper warrants any of the 25 available points that could have been given to it. I want to remind you as well that this is supposed to be a science essay. It is expected that you would be critical of the article that you are using science to discuss, and that you would be applying what you learnt whilst studying psychology, which at this point Samantha would be in her 2nd or 3rd year of, since she was in her 1st year of her degree early last year. So let's look at what Mel Kurth said in her marking of Sam's paper. Bear in mind, Mel's comments are what led to her being harassed appallingly in the media and being suspended from her job. Please note that I am not deducting points from you because you have certain beliefs, but instead I am deducting points for you posting a reaction paper that does not answer the question for this assignment, contradicts itself, it does, heavily uses personal ideology over empirical evidence in a scientific class, and is at times offensive. Whilst you are entitled to your personal beliefs, there is an appropriate time or place to implement them in your reflections. I encourage all students to question or challenge the course material with other empirical findings or testable hypotheses, but using your own personal beliefs to argue against the finding of not only this article, but the findings of countless articles across psychology, biology, sociology, etc. is not best practice. You argue that abiding by normative gender roles is beneficial. It is perfectly fine to believe this, but then you say that everyone should act the same, whilst also saying that people aren't pressured into gendered expectations, which is contradictory, especially since your arguments reflect a religious pressure to act in gender stereotypical ways. You can say that strict gender norms don't create stereotypes, but that isn't true by a definition of what a stereotype is. Please note that acknowledging gender stereotypes does not immediately denote a negative connotation, a nuance this article discusses. Additionally, to call an entire group of people demonic is highly offensive, especially a minoritized population. You're entitled to your own beliefs, but this isn't a vague narrative of society pushes lies, but instead the direct result of countless years developing psychological and scientific evidence for these claims and directly interacting with the communities involved. You may personally disagree with this, but that doesn't change the fact that every major psychological, medical, pediatric, and psychiatric association in the United States acknowledges that biologically and psychologically, sex and gender is neither binary nor fixed. I implore you to apply some more perspective and empathy in your work. If you personally disagree with the findings, then by all means share your criticisms, but make sure to do so in a way that is appropriate and using the methodology of empirical psychology as aligned with the learning goals in this class. If you have any additional questions or concerns about this, or would like some additional educational resources, I would be happy to discuss this further and provide you with them. So I completely, wholeheartedly agree with this response, and frankly it was incredibly supportive. She starts by clarifying that she is not penalizing her for any kind of religious beliefs, and offers to help her get more resources to help improve the way that she goes about her methodology of writing her work, which would only be beneficial in a career development standpoint. This is an incredibly supportive and great response, which says everything I would have said, probably even a little bit better than how I would have said them. It was constructive, respectful, and the only part that I would slightly push back on is the part where Mel says that Samantha called the entire group of people demonic. Samantha doesn't technically call trans people demonic, but she calls what she considers the lie that there are multiple genders to be demonic. Calling an opinion or phrase demonic, I think, is quite different to calling an opinion demonic, but it does imply that people who think that sex and gender are not the same or are not binary have been affected by demons. So personally, I don't think that's too far off, and I can see how Samantha's words could be interpreted that way and can be seen as deeply hurtful to a lot of trans people. As said earlier, Samantha was a freshman early last year, which means that she's now in her second or third year of her undergrad degree. There is no way to justify that someone that far into a science degree has still not been taught how to cite and reference scientific literature, or has somehow not gone through many other assignments that involve and require critical thinking of literature. But here's the thing, the course's co-chair, PhD student Megan Waldron, also agreed completely with Mel's grade, saying this: Samantha, I am the other instructor for this course, and I have also taken the time to read your paper. I concur with Mel on the grade you received. This paper should not be considered as a completion of the assignment. Everyone has different ways in which they see the world, but in an academic course such as this, you are being asked to support your ideas with empirical evidence and higher level reasoning. I find it concerning that you state at the beginning of your paper that you do not think bullying or teasing is a bad thing. In addition, your paper directly and harshly criticizes your peers and their opinions, which are just as valuable as yours. Disagreeing with others is fine, but there is a respectful way to go about it. That goes for discussion posts as well as reaction papers. Please employ more thoughtfulness in your future assignments. Again, I think this is a completely excellent response. So what happened is, a student submitted a very bad essay, and Mel Kurth, in her capacity as a lecturer running or helping to run the course, marked it flawlessly. And for that, she has been punished and placed on leave. And here's what makes the treatment of Mel Kurth even more unacceptable, and demonstrates that Turning Point have been even more dishonest than you realize. You see, she, Mel Kurth, is not a professor. She is a PhD student involved in lecturing. She has far less power in the university system and makes far less money than the smear articles and the Turning Point USA posts, which falsely call her a professor, imply she would make, and imply that she would have, by calling her a professor. And what do we know about Mel Kurth's teaching? Well, she is apparently very popular as a lecturer. 3 days ago, at the time of filming, she received an award from the Department of Psychology for outstanding graduate teaching. The post announcing that she received this award from the Department of Psychology for outstanding graduate teaching was deleted, presumably due to the barrage of hate she was getting and to avoid stoking controversy. But concerningly, it might have been deleted because the university wants to distance themselves from her due to this controversy, in which case that would be outrageous. Both Curtis and Megan Waldron have also had their emails removed from the university website, which hopefully was just done to protect them from harassment. If we go to Rate My Professors, Mel also shows an incredibly high score among students. Or at least she did, until this news broke yesterday. She had a 100% positive rating and great reviews from her students, with this student just a few days ago having complimented her for making classes that they actually enjoy rather than just have to sit through. And making lectures enjoyable is a real skill and shows that Mel has serious promise for a career in academia. Unfortunately, after this news broke, her score was tainted by a barrage of one-star reviews, calling her mentally ill because she's trans, saying that she's driven by leftist ideology and punishing conservatives, and calling her a leftist indoctrinator, and I'm seeing no evidence of this. Based on her students' words, as well as everything I've seen from her marking, and frankly, the way I would have marked the paper and every single other scientist I've talked to would have done, Malkuth is a truly gifted science communicator who did everything right by her student. This review literally lists her as 1 star, as in a poor quality teacher, purely because, and I quote, trans queer. And this is what the University of Oklahoma did to her in response. They placed her on leave. She might lose her ability to continue teaching. There are a huge number of calls on Twitter, including from politicians, and as well as no doubt countless emails flooding her department, calling for her to be fired from thousands of Turning Point followers. The claim the process has resulted in steps to ensure no academic harm for the student also really heavily implies that this deservedly bad grade won't count towards her final degree score, even though, as we saw, this paper is really bad and objectively deserved that bad grade. This is cowardice, and it sets a precedent that students can just be lazy in essays, accuse their lecturers of being anti-Christian bigots for giving them deservedly bad grades, and then have their poor results not count towards their grades in the future as well. Or worse, if this obviously false anti-Christian discrimination case is considered valid by the university, then it's possible that the university might give Samantha an A+ for this assignment, even though it is clearly terrible, and have a devastating effect on Malkuth's career moving forward. Malkuth did everything right, and she is being punished for this. And she is being punished far more than just institutionally. Malkuth has now been accused by the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus, a group comprising a number of state senators, of grading on the basis of ideology, even though, as we just saw, this is not true, and Mel clarified in her writing that she was not deducting points from Samantha on the basis of Samantha's right-wing Christian beliefs. The transphobia inherent to why Mel is being punished can easily be demonstrated by the fact that Samantha's mother, an openly conservative podcast and radio host and lawyer who has not only been vocal in her arguments for her daughter, but who has openly called for the disqualification of all trans people from roles of teachers or lecturers. Christy Fulnacki, that being Samantha's mother, is also notable for being a former Springfield, Mississippi councilwoman who, as reported by LGBTQ Nation, faced a recall campaign whilst in office due to, according to Ballotpedia, business license issues, and was heavily criticised during her times as councillor for financial and tax issues, as reported in this MSN article. In 2020, she sued several cities over mask mandates during the COVID pandemic, and LGBTQ Nation reports that she has since provided legal defence for January 6th rioters. Samantha's mother's record in mind, it is very hard to not view this as a pre-planned smear campaign designed to harm trans women in academic professions. Of particular note, the Republican governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, weighed in to imply that by grading Samantha's work poorly, Mel had unfairly graded her for her beliefs and impeded her First Amendment rights, with a number of conservative media influencers also spreading the lie that Samantha was failed for quoting the Bible, and that this was a result of the left taking over academia, such as this video by Brylan Hollyhand and this video by Michael Knowles. And frankly, these videos are so extraordinarily dishonest that I could even turn them into their own videos, but I won't because this is supposed to be a geology channel. I think the response to these people is best put by Alonso Garmendi, who said, and if a third-year college student doesn't know that a reaction paper instructing her to critically engage with a scholarly work obviously requires her to cite academic sources, then frankly, she has not learned the basics and she is not ready to graduate in a year. And also, Dr. Amelia Ziatlo, who said, as a professor, if you don't answer a question, you don't get points for it. Getting a 0 for not answering a prompt has nothing to do with the First Amendment. Opinions, beliefs are irrelevant unless they are part of the prompt. If you can't handle that, then college isn't for you. I agree with both of them. This backlash and the fear of conservative reprisal for doing so also sets the precedent that universities could now stop hiring trans people in academic roles for fear of arbitrary anti-woke backlash. When people are arbitrarily excluded from academia on the basis of minority status, the unique ideas and insights they have the potential to bring to the world's knowledge base is potentially lost. Who knows what discoveries might not happen because universities stop hiring trans people in response to something like this, and what incredible minds might now not be fostered for fear of reprisal. The scientific community must reject this conservative backlash. We must stand in support of an exemplary academic whose career is being turned into a symbol of mockery by conservatives. This precedent must end. This is not politics. This is a university caving to bigotry and abuse. I have created this petition to the University of Oklahoma, and I am asking people to sign and share it. We cannot let the career of a promising academic be destroyed by the conservative outrage machine. I also have to selfishly look at this and think, when I hopefully manage to get a job in academia, if I have to mark a student's essay and they say, this paper's dating methods must be wrong because the world is only 6,000 years old, and I mark them down for that because it's demonstrably wrong, the precedent this sets is that I could then be subjected to this exact same kind of witch hunt. You know, where they say trans lecturer down marks Christian student, and I'm not even anti-Christian! Now, I do not know you, but as a fellow trans scientist who could easily have been put in the same position when I was a tutor, I firmly stand with you. As a scientific community, we cannot let academia be ruled by ignorance, bigotry, exclusion, and prejudice. Everyone, before you like and subscribe, please sign this petition, and hopefully we can make a difference and help Mel's career be reinstated. I also want to thank my friend Ocean for bringing this topic to my attention, and to thank Dead Domain for sharing my petition already. This petition thus far has over 500 signatures. I would like to try to get this to at least 4,000. I'm saying that because I want us, as a scientific and academic community, and as skeptics and fans of science, to drown out this anti-science, anti-education, anti-academia, and bigoted hate campaign with genuine support. I want Mel to know that there are far more people rooting for her than there are against her. This also goes for Megan, who I can only assume is also facing a large amount of harassment since her email was also taken down. Huge shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters. In particular, my wonderful 4-round tier supporters, Aries, Geneva, and Tiles, as well as my delightful Dilophosaurus tier supporters, Hours, and Futurebird. Shout out also goes to my Radiolarian tier supporters, Askell, Rowie Utting, Glenn Collins, and John and Eric Feenstra. If you want to support the channel, there's a good chance I might actually need to delete my Patreon soon due to work contract related reasons. I'll keep you posted. But in the meantime, if you could like, subscribe, and share this video, and in particular share the petition. Thank you very much for watching. Oh hey, and in the next video we're going to be talking about dinosaurs again!